This is produced as part of the ongoing work on the website, thewaythetruthandthelife.net.
Clarifying confusion and ignorance, Quran, Islam, and Muslim. This is the introduction to part 3 of clarifying the terms Quran, Islam, and Muslim. The three terms interact so that you can't really talk about one without talking about the other, but let me try to operationally define. The Quran is that book which is taken to be the literal word of Allah as delivered to Muhammad by the angel Gabriel and memorized by Muhammad and later recorded. And the book that we now have is taken as by Islam as the literal words of Allah, the God of the universe, who created mankind out of a blood clot, according to the Koran. So we could operationally define the Quran as that book. And we've clarified some things, that the different messages are called surahs. And they, of course, were received one after the other. And one of the surahs, in the book, it's put as number 2, but though that's not the chronological order. That surah says that Allah can change his mind and bring something better, and the latest thing is what counts. But the order of the surahs confuses that they're not in chronological order. The earlier surahs, many of them were very peaceful. When Muhammad thought that the Jews and Christians would accept him as the last greatest prophet. Muhammad had learned about monotheism from Christians and Jews. His own tribe was, for the most part, polytheistic, and he was more against that than he was against the Christians and the Jews. They were people of the book. He used the rationale of one God as and serving that God as the rationale for rape, pillage, and plunder, building a pyramid power scheme, and rewarding his followers with the booty. That he also was familiar with some of what we call apocrypha. If you read the Quran, I think it's 4 places about Jesus where he made mud birds and blew on them and they flew away. That comes out of what's called the infancy gospel of Thomas. Was somewhere there in origin. It was in Egypt, about 200 years after Christ, and Muhammad was going there about 600 years after Christ, and there were people that had these apocryphal books, and he also had those and corrupted the Quran by putting in part of this corrupt gospel that was rejected by the Christian people that compiled the books that have truth value in them. Jesus was, he said, a prophet, but that he was a greater prophet, that Jesus would come again as a Muslim, that Jesus was not crucified, that the Christian literature is all corrupted according to Islamic teaching. So at my website I have published, in the part 1 I showed the chronological order. Now part 2 was Islam, and Islam is a societal organization based on the Koran. If culture refers to child rearing, it is a culture. It is a complete way of life dictating every aspect of life, and the home, and chastity, and the submission of women. It does say in the Quran that if the wife doesn't behave, man can take her to the private quarters and beat her. That's true. It's hard for me to talk about these things when I know there are some things about Islam that are addressing deep-seated problems that modern Western society doesn't respond to. For example, in Russia there are more abortions than live births. And I'll take a minute to share some insight.
Images like this from the Auschwitz concentration camp have been seared into our consciousness during the 20th century and have given us a new understanding of who we are, where we've come from, and the times we live in. During the 20th century, we witnessed the atrocities of Stalin, Hitler, Mao, Pol Pot, Rwanda, and other genocides. And even though the 21st century is only 7 years old, we have already witnessed an ongoing genocide in Darfur and the daily horrors of Iraq. This has led to a common understanding of our situation, namely that modernity has brought us terrible violence, and perhaps that native peoples lived in a state of harmony that we have departed from to our peril. Here's an example from an op-ed on Thanksgiving in the Boston Globe a couple of years ago, where the writer wrote, "The Indian life was a difficult one, but there was no employment problems, community harmony was strong, substance abuse unknown, crime nearly non-existent. What warfare there was between tribes was largely ritualistic and seldom resulted in indiscriminate or wholesale slaughter." Now, you're all familiar with this treacle. We teach it to our children. We hear it on television and in storybooks. Now, the original title of this session was "Everything You Know Is Wrong," and I'm going to present evidence that this particular part of our common understanding is wrong. That in fact, our ancestors were far more violent than we are, that violence has been in decline for long stretches of time, and that today we are probably living in the most peaceful time in our species' existence. Now, in the decade of Darfur and Iraq, a statement like that might seem somewhere between hallucinatory and obscene, but I'm going to try to convince you that that is the correct picture. The decline of violence is a fractal phenomenon. You can see it over millennia, over centuries, over decades, and over years, although there seems to have been a tipping point at the onset of the Age of Reason in the 16th century. One sees it all over the world, although not homogeneously. It's especially evident in the West, beginning with England and Holland around the time of the Enlightenment. Let me take you on a journey from several powers of 10 from the millennium scale to the year scale to try to persuade you of this. Until 10,000 years ago, all humans lived as hunter-gatherers without permanent settlements or government. And this is the state that's commonly thought to be one of primordial harmony. But the archaeologist Lawrence Keeley, looking at casualty rates among contemporary hunter-gatherers, namely, which is our best source of evidence about this way of life, has shown a rather different conclusion. Here's a graph that he put together showing the percentage of male deaths due to warfare in a number of foraging or hunting and gathering societies. The red bars correspond to the likelihood that a man will die at the hands of another man as opposed to passing away of natural causes in a variety of foraging societies in the New Guinea highlands and the Amazon rainforest. And they range from a rate of almost a 60% chance that a man will die at the hands of another man to, in the case of the Gabuski, only a 15% chance. The tiny little blue bar in the lower left-hand corner plots the corresponding statistic from the United States and Europe in the 20th century, and it includes all the deaths of both world wars. If the death rate in tribal warfare had prevailed during the 20th century, there would have been 2 billion deaths rather than 100 million.
Insight into the differences that have survived, that have expressed themselves genetically in men and women, and the difficulty of why women are so willing to give up their children, and why wealthy women and affluence destroys the home and child care. They want babysitters. We understand God's laws of biology, that what survives to propagate is what is propagated. It's survival of those that are able. And what does that mean for men and women?
All right, my brain is slightly smaller than Ben's. On average, women have 150 grams less in their head.
You just watched, I hope, or if not, go back and watch The Myth of the Noble Savage. There'll be refinements about the differences between the people that developed in the north and the people that developed in the middle latitudes and the people that developed in the equatorial latitudes. Those are completely different environments, and they have their own impact genetically on the human backgrounds that developed there. But I'm going to speak here about the differences between men and women. This harsh background, where up to 60% of the men in tribes died by violent death in conflict with other tribes. And the main basis of conflict has to do with survival in the genetic sense. Inbreeding destroys the strength of a tribe. If the woman has a bad vision gene and the man has a bad vision gene, the child gets a gene from each, and if both have that bad vision gene, the child has no hope. That we have many bad genes from on one side and a good one on the other, and the good dominates the bad gene, and we end up with good vision, or we end up with the ability to hear, or whatever, even though we carry a weak part also. It isn't dominant. So when we inbreed, if your mother has a weak gene, and then her children, if they inbreed, they're both likely to have that gene. If a mother and a father both have the gene, that's it for the child. They're going to have it. They don't have a chance. So this is survival of the fittest, those who get strange genes. And how does this problem solve? We know that what survives. In the Eskimos, what survived were the tribes that when a male visitor was coming through, which was rare, they would invite him to sleep with the wife or the daughter. Not a matter of lust or some
oh, that's awful thing. Simply a matter of that's what survived, because it gave the health to the offsprings, that they could win the battle or catch the fish or catch the wolf or whatever. They were better equipped to survive. In the deserts, among the Arab tribes, their conflict was to do battle, just like in hunter-gatherer tribes, to get young women. That was the main motivation for battle. One of the solutions that the ancient Arab culture developed was to bury their beautiful young maidens and leave them in the sand. If they were discovered by another tribe, that's fine. We weren't attacked for that. If they died, that just happened. The male children were more valuable because they could engage in battle and defend the tribe. And they had the strength to do the hunting, so forth, and with the wild animals, lions and tigers and wolves and so forth. So, but what survived among the men were those who could work together. What survived among the women was those who could, even though they resented, they were taken by rape. You can begin to understand why women have oftentimes a resentment of their pregnancy or no attachment to the fetus. There are hundreds of thousands of years of history of women being taken by violent rape and being forced to have a child that was not born of love, but was born of violence. It gives some insight into women's genetic conflict between being a loving mother and someone who resents having this child. But how did they survive? By forming alliance with other women, by manipulating the chiefs and priests, by manipulating other men against the man who was dominating them. But they didn't have the physical strength. They had to use their ingenuity, and that's what survived, the ones who were good manipulators.
On average, men are about 15% bigger than women, and there are other physical differences between the sexes. It seems that men and women actually think differently, thanks to the hardwiring of the circuits inside our brain.
What survived amongst the men? It was those who could make an army out of their group. That is, that they could have the trust and discipline and honor to work together in battle and trust one another. So that's what tended to survive. That's why the Bible says 1 man in 1,000, but who can find a woman? Also, the logic of hunting and the logic of warfare led to hemispheric differences for the men.
The human brain is divided into 2 separate hemispheres, connected by the fibers of the corpus callosum. The way we use the left and right hemispheres influences the way we think. The male brain is structured so that the left side is used for language, and the right-hand side is used for emotion. But things are very different for females, because their fibers connecting the brain's 2 hemispheres are 23% thicker than in the male brain. Women are able to use both the right and left hemispheres for emotion and language.
The women have two sides that are basically duplicates of each other. That's why they tend, if they have a stroke, they tend to be less harmed than a man, because the men are more specialized in their hemisphere. The women tend to duplicate on this side what's on this side. But also the women have fewer brain cells. And they've developed with a different environment. The logic of warfare and the logic of catching that animal and planning ahead by logic. Women are very good at many tasks at a machine and a repetitive task. They're able to do it without distraction. Both brains are functioning on the same thing in the same way. Men get distracted. If you all over Europe, and if you went to Asia, the same thing in the computer rooms. You find boys. The girls aren't interested. They might be hanging around for the boys, but the girls are not interested in these logical games. It's a different brain. Boys have more brain cells and the logical development and curiosity, because that's what survived in the males.
There actually is an understanding of autism having to do with the lack of a maternal nursing bond.
The twins started talking. They learned how to say dada, then they learned how to say bye-bye, and then it just stopped.
It just went away, and we were confused. We were like, well, why can't they say bye? Why aren't they waving anymore? They'd start covering their ears and spinning. Justin would spin with his eyes at the top of his head, and it was kind of freaky. It was kind of scary.
How old are you? The boys have autism. Let me guess. 14. 7? 12? They live in their own little world. Give me 5. A world where other humans don't exist. They trust objects more than humans, and it's impossible to reach them on our level. How about one of these guys? You want to put one of these guys on? You don't want to play blocks anymore?
They don't like human contact, which is why they like videos. They like rewinding. So they can rewind a video and play, and rewind and play, and rewind and play, and it'll go on for hours and hours and hours, because they know what's going to happen. Whereas if you walk into a room, they don't know whether you're going to be angry, whether you're going to be sad, whether you're going to be happy, whether you're going to be yelling, whether you're going to be whispering. So they steer away from that. They don't understand human beings. They don't understand our world.
Many kids with autism don't speak. They don't look at you. They don't even show affection. Now, this is the home of Stevie Fuller. Stevie also has autism. When he was 5, he was in the same shape as the twins. Stevie's 9 now. And today, things are a little bit different. Hey, Stevie. How you doing?
What do you say? Hi.
Hi.
This is his name.
What is my name?
My name is...
Who is that?
I'm Michael.
I'm Mike.
Yeah. What's your name?
What's your name?
Steve.
Yeah.
Dad.
That's Francisco.
Say hi, Francisco.
Hi.
The difference? Stephen's parents went here, to the Option Institute in Western Massachusetts. The founders also had an autistic child, but they cured their son by playing with him. Now they train other parents on how to create special playrooms and reach their children. Does it work? The founder's son is now a college graduate with a near genius IQ. The key is to do whatever the child does.
Only rice and corn.
Join him in his world. Then the child finds out he is in control and is accepted. A bond of trust is established, and it's then that the child will venture into the grown-up's world. But it takes a lot of the specialized play. 8 hours a day, 7 days a week. Now, most parents can't fill this schedule, so they count on volunteers that they train in order to help. Sarah Klaus has been with Stephen for 4 years and cherishes every moment.
It's phenomenal. It's touched me personally more than I think that I teach Steve.
This is the playroom. We're not quite finished with it yet.
The Pop's playroom is almost finished. It only needs one more thing.
I need volunteers to help me with the Sunrise program in home and to play with them, to be a kid again, someone with energy, enthusiasm, and excitement.
That doesn't sound like a lot.
In my upbringing, before the effects of the Second World War took the women out of the home, it was called being a mother. It still is called being a mother in Islam. One of the things that children born as Muslims often have the joy of having a mother in the home. Its research shows that a child responds to the mother's voice from knowing it from the womb, and that up in even a year old, hearing the mother's voice brings a calming effect, and another woman or man saying the same thing causes stress. The maternal nursing bond is a blessing. It needs to be respected. Motherhood needs to be respected by the mothers. We need to be able, like my uncle that had a mink farm, he had to choose the mothers well. And by doing that, he could build a breed that would care for its young. By selecting those mothers that were good mothers and the litter of those good mothers to go on, the others were turned into mink coats. So this one thing for Muslims, they tend to care about mothering.
But to the Pop family, it's everything.
It's kind of scary to think that one day I may not be here, and then who's going to love them? Because if they're not independent, who's going to take care of them and know what they want? You know, if they stay where they're at. Does that make sense?
Donna and her husband need volunteers to give the twins their only shot at a normal life. What would it be like years from now to be invited to Josh and Justin's college graduation or wedding, knowing that you played a large part in their success and happiness? Now, they aren't necessarily looking for just teachers. The Pops need people who remember what it's like being a kid. People who can actually play. Actors and drama majors are best for this role. Now, the training is free. The paybacks are countless. If you can help Josh and Justin, give me a call. 852-4971. With photographer Francisco Caceres, this is Michael Flannery, 9 on your kid's side.
But these things, the women's liberation and gay and homosexual rights in Western society are so strong politically that it's it's stronger than Islam. I will state here, I have no doubt in my mind that the effort of Western thinkers is to use women's liberation and homosexual liberation as the tools to undermine Islam.
In Taliban regime, and also before that, women don't know about their rights. Men do something that women don't want. Men's actions against women is not like a human. It's just like an animal. They think women don't have any rights, don't have any idea. They don't know about themselves. Before 5 and 6 years, they didn't know about their rights. Women just was at home, and also they saw, and also just they looked to their husband, and they thought everything that their husband and also their father-in-law and their brother-in-law say, that's right, that's it. For a woman or for a girl to get out from home and also go to the course, to the shelter, and also to other place and climb, it's too shameful for them. And they don't have this right to go out. Suppose a woman or a girl get out from home and went to a shelter. Unfortunately, judge can't listen to them. And always, this is their advice. Go home and stay. It's too bad for you. Women don't have any solution. The last point is that to burn themselves. They know about their rights, but there is no organization, no place to hear them. That's why they get decision to burn themselves. Our office activities just to support women and also children. We work on that cases. We have a shelter, and also right now in our shelter we have more than 50 cases. Almost around 80% of our cases is run away and also domestic violence. And 20% other cases, they are just break engagement, divorce, and also no place to stay, rape, abuse, and etc. In Afghanistan, people don't like shelter's name. They are against shelter. They think that shelter is just to cheat women. They think that shelter responsible person persuade their wife to leave home or ask for divorce. People think so. But it's not right. Day by day, Afghanistan situation become better. And I hope after 3 or 4 years, there will be no burn case, no run away, no rape. I hope so.
I have no doubt about that. And in many ways, Islam seeks to protect the home and protect the sanctity of marriage. It's true, Muhammad had a war-making pyramid scheme that still goes on, and the culture, the rearing of children, has been based on the readiness to sacrifice, especially the males, and in any culture like that men can have more than one wife is a no-brainer. There's stories about in Russia, the communist revolution killed so many men, and then the German war killed so many men that only a couple men would come back to a whole village, but yet the women would have babies. So we understand something going on there. But I am trying to lay out how to clarify Muslim. I first met Muslims at the university. I was married, had 3 kids, a wife, and 2 mortgages at the time. I had taken a leave of absence and was receiving some veterans funding to go to the university, and university loans, which I wasn't able to pay off for 20 years. I was paying on them and the interest. But at that time, I studied in the Science and Engineering Library on the Main Street campus of Buffalo, New York. The new SUNY University campus in Amherst was just being made. In my later parts of my experience there, and when I went for a master's degree, I attended classes at the new campus also. But working in the Science and Engineering Library, many Muslims would come in. They were in classes that I was in, many of them from Iran, and there were two groups. There was a wealthy group, and then there was common folk. And I remember them sharing that they were concerned that Sabbat, or whatever the name of the Iranian secret police was, that they were monitored on campus, they thought. But there were two groups, the wealthy and the more common, and they did play games sometimes, working together. Like when there would be a research report due, and the references in the library would that were not supposed to be taken out would somehow not be there. And I discovered a couple of times that some of these Muslims had sequestered the references and taken them out of their proper order and had made a private library. And the wealthier ones were not above having someone else do their work. And as a group, I saw them more often when they wanted help with their work. I worked there every day, and there were others working there every day. But not to demean them all, there were nice people, and I'll put a picture up. I had some I invited to my home, and they were shocked. I said, we're Muslim. I didn't know anything about it. What does that mean? I said, well, we pray 5 times a day. I said, I pray 5 times a day when I get up in the morning, the 3 meals, and when I go to bed at night. That's nothing strange to me. I didn't understand. I felt a stress when they said, well, we're Muslim, I didn't know that they were duty bound by the Koran, by Surah number 9, to convert me, or after a time to bring me into submission or death, if they could. Of course, they had no power to do that, and they even, when I wanted to visit their apartment, they reluctantly allowed me to, and it was very simple. There was I don't know, I think probably 4 students in the apartment, something like that. Just a stress that I did not understand, rather than spontaneity. How much of that was because they were brought up through memorization of the Koran, or how much of that was something else? There was tension with the Iranian politics at that time, and the Islamic rebellion against the Shah, and the Shah had been supported by the American government, and so that led to Islamic anti-Americanism as part of the anti-Shah. But where am I going with this? I want to portray Muslims as people, the same as Christian people in many ways, except this memorization of the Quran and its willingness to legitimize murder and suicide to children even. It's hard for me to comprehend. I recognize that this innocence, childlike innocence in these children being programmed, that they can be, what was the name for supposed North Koreans capturing Americans and then hypnotically conditioning them and sending them back to respond to hypnotic suggestion and kill the president or something. There's a name for it, but hypnotism is real. Roy Masters was a Jew who was a hypnotist, had learned hypnotism as a boy, and then he realized that it was evil, that he was harming their soul, their culture, their ability to think independently, that he was corrupting their outlook in life and putting things in their thinking that were not theirs, and that he realized that there were attempts in Judaism to be able to meditate, but they were meditations with words that left with programming. And he learned the forgiveness of those who have violated you is a very important part of becoming free from the hypnotic conditioning. He likes to use the example of a woman who was raped in a red car with a man with a beard on a rainy night, or whatever. That after that there's a stress around red cars, and there's a stress on rainy nights, and there's a stress around men with beards, a hypnotic suggestion. And these things are true. I just was going to driving to Washington, D.C. to testify at a Food and Drug Administration hearing on electroconvulsive treatment. That was 26th and 27th of January of this year, 2011. I hope to be able to put that testimony on the internet. I've put testimony from previous hearings on the internet. But there are many problems, and there's many things that are threatening and harming. Here's the backbone of the problem. As I woke up to Islam, when I went to Russia and had to walk through where the bodies had laid, the flowers still there in 2000 September, when I was married, walking through the subway where the marks were still there, where the bomb had gone off and the dead bodies had been strewn. And then planes that we fly from Moscow south to Mineralny Vody, where these people on the 19th flew to and got a minibus to Elbrus, and 3 of the tourists were killed by Islamists who don't want development in the area. They're ethnically cleansing it, forcing Russians that are not Muslim out. They've blown up a number of buses in the Mineralny airport. They have had kidnappings and murders. But you could find out about this history. It's going on all the time. But the Muslims suffer. They've been killing peace-preaching Muslims. Understand, it's a real problem now, because the communists taught literacy. Everybody can read the Koran now, and what it says, and can be made guilty if they're not following it. And make a few examples. But I've lived with Muslims in my building, and some conditioning their children that they're threatened by me, and others very well willing to talk, and not a problem. They're secular Muslims, I guess you would say. But
these things motivated me to look into Islam. I discovered some things like, as they expanded through building armies that would go in and literally rape, pillage, and plunder. The men would get booty from this and get wives from this. They were rewarded for it. And as they went into India, this is around the year 10,000, that's where the Roma and Gypsies came from. They were non-Muslim armies that the invaders forced off the land as they progressed in battle. And they went, the whole family went, and they were making war in the field for a couple of generations until the grandchildren were what was left, and they didn't have any concept of a homeland. That was where the Gypsies and Roma came from. I was brought up to think they were Egyptian or from Rome. We had them in Pennsylvania. Now they're still all over Russia and Europe. I don't know if there's any, it's just going for handouts in America anymore. But when I looked into it, my goodness, in that campaign, the Muslims murdered, I originally published 150, and I was corrected. There's a researcher from Europe that academically published, and it's corrected at least 170 million. I thought, how terrible, how terrible. And I had done the math, how many the Muslims had murdered a year, and I was just shocked. Because it actually keeps going on. If you look at what goes on in China, where the Muslims are aggressive, in India, where the Muslims are aggressive, in Thailand, where the Muslims are aggressive, in Palestine, where the Muslims are aggressive, in Lebanon, where the Muslims are aggressive, in the Philippines, where the Muslims are aggressive, there in Indonesia, where they beheaded the schoolgirls, and all of this that's going on. And I thought, how terrible. And then I realized socialism, whether the male-dominant National Socialism, Nazism, or the female-dominant communism, they murdered that many in 100 years. So which is it took 1,400 years for the Muslims to murder 170 million. Socialism did it in 100 years. So which is more evil? It's a no-brainer. I have friends that got radicalized from the Vietnam War, and they're so cold and hard and anti-Christian and pro-socialist. Now, of course, they say Russia was just a bad example. It was a capitalist enterprise of a single company, but they have the idealism that can murder. Hard for me to comprehend. Anyway, socialism murdered in 100 years what it took the Muslims 1,400 years. Muhammad started around 600 years after Christ. How terrible this was. Well, obviously, socialism is more evil than Islam. And socialism is destroying the homes. Of course, the best home culture has been the farm culture, where the family works together and the children are part of the process and have fellowship all day long. You don't have to worry about autism. The children are carried with them in the fields, and you just don't have autism in this environment. That's another thing.
how modern society is destroying the potential of human beings. And Islam is concerned about that too. And Muslims are humans like you and me that aren't Muslim. They're concerned about that too. So this is a real concern. And Islam tries to address this, and Muslims understand that. And they want to care for their children. They want a healthy society. And they want a healthy future for their children. Well, many do. Just like many non-Muslims. My stepfather came from Germany when he was 12. Ich spreche Deutsch auch. Bisschen. Genug zu auskommen. When I was in Germany, and I was in Poland, Gdansk, it used to be Danzig, and had to talk with the people and rented a room and so forth, had enough language to be able to do that at least. But here's the point. The hardness of the Germans, the ability to murder. Here they are, like you and me. You can walk safely down the street and preach, but nobody. There you can send a bowling ball down a church in Europe, anywhere in the middle of Sunday and not worry about hitting anybody. They become secular something. Okay, where am I going with this? Society, as far as culture of rearing healthy children to reach their potential, is breaking down. I'll insert this here to make the point that in something like 1400 years, Islam murdered in the order of 200 million people. And in the order of 100 years, socialism, whether masculine national socialism or feminine communism, that is the dominance of it, they murdered that many in approximately 100 years. And then I discovered that women's liberation, with its abortion justification, legalizing the murder of unborn, murders that many in 3 or 4 years. So which is more evil? In Russia, they're murdering more babies than live births. Now that's not true for Muslims. Muslims, through Islam, have a policy of birthing to gain a dominance in a democratic manner. Of course, in the northern Caucasus, there's more and more ethnic cleansing going on, where the young non-Muslims just get out. The poor elderly are left to struggle. And this story can be told in other times in other areas. The point is, there is something very harmful, much more harmful than Islam, is the socialism, an ideology built out of intellectualism, of intellectuals highly educated in an abstract environment, devout, they're deprived of the background of natural learning in a more natural, material, spatial mobility environment, raised in apartments, educated in classrooms taught to memorize the past tests, and disabled, unable to get their feet on the ground in reality. They confuse fact with what they've been told. They confuse their observations. You hear over and over, oh, everybody's entitled to your opinion. You know, if somebody falls off a 5-story building and they kill themselves, it's for sure. Oh, well, everybody's entitled to their opinion. It just, you can go through this, and it's unfortunate. These people have been deprived of the early natural learning that gives them what we call common sense, that intuitive ability to recognize this violates reality somehow. And in that, of course, through communism is injected the class struggle, hatred. They have and we don't have. They're stealing from us. You can get it. Chavez now in Venezuela, and he's supporting Gaddafi, even though Gaddafi's bombing his own people. Gaddafi was his friend. Gaddafi gave him money, and he's setting himself up as the ability to dictate law, and that's just a manifestation of socialism for Venezuela, and it will kill and murder and be stronger than Islam, just as Gaddafi with his persona was stronger than Islam. But where am I going with this? We have a common problem. We need to operationally define terms. That would be left for another section, but the point here is Muslims are people. They need help not to be violated as children, and they need to be respected. This young man in Tunisia, Bouzi, I think his first name is Muhammad, but he showed Christ's spirit and set off a series of revolutions. Yes, they will try to co-opt it. The women's liberation will try to co-opt it. The Islamists will try to co-opt it. The socialists will try to co-opt it. They all have their agenda and their rationale, and they all have their political correctness with which they can persecute others. Our desire is my desire, and those who I respect desire to understand more clearly and help intelligent existence reach its highest potential. Clearly, the breakdown of the home and marriage, the family farm, the family cottage, children not being raised free to work in the garden, work with animals, free to walk in the woods, free to learn by experiencing matter, space, and motion directly, stuck in classrooms learning what somebody else said before their brain is developed. But let's look at the main issues here of what is a crime against humanity. Let's start with the simple fact that imposing this strict laws of the Koran in Basra in 2007, there were 42 women killed between July and September. because they were not dressed properly. Now, on this issue, I prefer modest men and women. The Bible says, let it not be the outward adorning and braiding of hair and wearing of jewelry, but let it be the hidden person of the heart. Well, if a person wants to be a Christian, that's their business. And if they want to reflect the modesty that is admired, that's their business. Personal beliefs are personal beliefs. But look at all the young women that are committing suicide and setting themselves on fire in Afghanistan. There's something terribly wrong here in the culture of killing those who would go away from Islam. But let's go on to the more critical issue of Muslims, referring to Muslims, and let's look at what really is important here. A major difference between Muslims, people who have built or inherited a society on the foundation of murder and stealing, have an internal conflict between respecting self and respecting others. Think of the Muslims invading what used to be a Byzantine Empire or Armenia, and what was a Christian region, and now they've murdered and driven off or forced by violence the conversion of so many, very few conversions, till Turkey is 99% Muslim. They murdered over 1.5 million in my grandmother's lifetime. In my mother's lifetime. What am I talking about? My mother was born in 1912. This is a terrible, and the inferiority complex and superiority complex built on top of it to justify this inhumanity, this crime against humanity. It goes on all the time. It's not just Turkish people. Criminal gangs have the superiority complex also. That there's two types of populations that are caught up in this theocratic rationale for murdering. The most important and the worst crime against humanity is the indoctrination of children before brain growth gives them discrimination. They are robots. It isn't the Manchurian Candidate and a soldier captured and indoctrinated, although there can be some hypnotic suggestion. But children are deprived of rationality if they are indoctrinated during their early life stages. Children indoctrinated before brain growth stage gives discrimination are unable to differentiate between respect for others, seeing murder as a service to God, parents, family, clan, country, theocracy, whatever. They look on the face. I've shown you the pictures of these young men. They were the innocent faces, like a service to God, to go and kill themselves. This is sacrifice to a God. This is sacrificing children, the very thing that Abraham set an archetype example of, replacing human sacrifice with an animal sacrifice. This is a terrible crime against humanity, and it's indoctrinated so it's become like turned upside down. It brings glory. You can get elected to a Muslim legislature for having a son that goes out and murders a bunch of teenagers while he commits suicide. What a crime against humanity to allow this type of indoctrination. Look at the children's television, what they're doing. And what it says, what the children have to memorize. Look at Surah 2, verse 62. Surely those who believe, and those who are Jews and Christians and Sabians, whoever believes in Allah and the last day and does good, they shall have their reward from their Lord, and there is no fear in them, nor shall they grieve. And we took a promise from you and lifted the mountain over you. Take hold of the law, Tavarat. We have given you with firmness, and bear in mind what is in it, so that you can guard against evil. Then you turned back after that. So were it not for the grace of Allah and His mercy on you, you would certainly have been among the losers. And certainly you have known those you who exceeded the limits of the Sabbath. So we said to them, be as apes, despised and hated. This is what children are memorizing. If you go away from Islam, you're despised and hated. Christians and Jews and other people. Then Surah 5, verse 59. Say, O believer of the book, believers in the book are Christians and Jews, do you find fault with us for aught, except that we believe in Allah and in what has been revealed to us and what was revealed before, and that most of you are transgressors? Say, shall I inform you of him who is worse than this in retribution from Allah? Worse is he, whom Allah has cursed and brought his wrath upon, and of whom he hath made apes and swine, and he who serves Satan. These are worse in place and more erring from the straight path. And then Surah, those people of the book, apes and pigs. Surah 7, verse 166. Therefore, they revoltingly persisted in what they had been forbidden. We say to them, be as apes, despised and hated. And Surah 8, verse 12. When your Lord revealed to the angels, I am with you, therefore make firm those who believe. I will cast terror into the hearts of those who disbelieve. Therefore strike off their heads, strike off every fingertip of them. This is what children memorize. If you don't follow Islam, cut off the head, cut off the fingers. Surah 9. Fight those who do not believe in Allah, nor in the latter day, nor do they prohibit what Allah and His apostle have prohibited, nor follow the religion of truth. Out of those who have been given the book, that's Christians and Jews, until they pay the tax and acknowledgement of superiority, and they are in a state of subjection. Jews and Christians must be in subjection. And the Jews say, Isaiah is son of Allah, and Christians say, the Messiah is son of Allah. These are the words of their mouth. They imitate the saying of those who disbelieved before. May Allah destroy them, how they are turned away. They have taken their doctors of the law and their monks and lords besides Allah, and also the Messiah, son of Miriam, and they were enjoined that they should serve one God only. There is no God but He. Far from His glory be what they have set up with Him. That's rejecting Jesus as the Christ. Islam is an antichrist. Yes, Jesus was a prophet. Made mud birds and blew on them, and they flew away. That's in the Koran from the apocryphal book, the Infancy Gospel of Thomas. But this is what children are being forced to memorize before they have the brain growth that they could discriminate. They will be forever confused. They might rebel, like the Jews rebel against their indoctrination, but they've lost the foundation for individual sovereignty. They're goofy. Like I have a number of friends that were brought up in academia, and you just have to be patient with them. They're so goofy. They were taught to memorize and remember and indoctrinated without the, I say raised in chicken coops. That's apartments and classrooms. They lack the common sense experience. Now, here's what Piaget understood. The pre-operational stage for child development is between 2 and 7. That's magical thinking predominates, acquisition of motor skills. Egocentrism begins strongly and then weakens. Children cannot conserve or use logical thinking. This is between 2 and 7. And concrete operational stage between 7 and 12. Children begin to think logically, but are very concrete in their thinking. Children can now conserve and think logically, but only with practical aids. They are no longer egocentric. They move from narcissism to homoerotic, loving others like self. Boys like boys and girls like girls. This is the natural homosexual stage of development. It is a crime against humanity to indoctrinate children before they're 12. At least before 7. They shouldn't be stuck in these apartments and classrooms. They should be out playing, out working, growing things, raising animals, experiencing reality, fishing, hunting, catching animals, raising them. And then learn. There's a rapid learning stage around 7. It's a good time to learn language, even a little bit before that. Yes, the verbal skills to talk and talk about concrete things, not abstract. Talk about what the child already understands. They don't have words for it, but they understand as they go through. After 7 years old, they start to have concrete logic, but they need the verbal experience to attach words to this concrete logic, and to develop such things as counting, so forth. It's a natural thing. It shouldn't be programmed. The child will develop, and if they have a healthy relationship and environment, their curiosity will motivate them. It's a crime against humanity what we're doing to children. They haven't got a chance to have a individual sovereignty. The idea of common sense is a joke. Such goofiness you can get from them, such hatred, such love, and it's out of balance with physical, material reality, space and motion. which is the foundation then for behavioral reality, and experiencing a foundation of a maternal nursing bond and a paternal protection and provision bond that actually helps the child become free from domination and such evils as associating the breast or food with security, so that they have an eating problem when they grow up. Food is for eating. That yes, the warmth of the mother's breast is a wonderful thing, and it can be very sense of security, but to use it in a way that corrupts the child, that's a whole other area of discussion. But look what's going on. The Turkish Penal Code, this idea of the two rationales: children indoctrination, a crime against humanity, and adults who have come from a background of criminal violation of other people's human rights. And here's Turkey, just got through murdering 1.5 million and is in denial. And they have this Article 301, controversial article of the Turkish Penal Code, that make it illegal to insult Turkey, Turkish ethnicity, or Turkish government institutions. Now that's all except the government institutions are supposed to be secular, but Erdogan, as wife, violates that, but that's okay. And the judge that was enforcing the secularism and secular dress in the universities was killed right in the courtroom. Oh, well, he died after, but he didn't make it through the day. This Turkishness took place in 1905, or pardon me, 2005. In my website, I follow along the still unresolved. This is 2011. In 2007, 3 Christian missionaries were horrifically tortured and murdered. And the games going on between this covert Islamic government supporting the anti-Christian and anti-secular, and here's judges and military officers that are rational and trying to protect the secularism of public life, that they're not dominated by this hate, and there the game is going like they're being blamed for what the Islamists are promoting. It's and they want to get into the European Union with this. It's unbelievable to me. I think I've mentioned before, August, when the Turkish came to the region of Armenia that was Russian, they only were after they weren't supposed to come across the river, but they came. There was no Russian army there, but they didn't kill the Russians. They were looking for Armenians. Olga's grandmother hid one in the potato cellar. It was a trap door under the kitchen floor, and he survived. And they got another one on the grain tower. They had in their village the grain up on stilts, so the rats couldn't get at it. And they found an Armenian up in the grain tower and murdered him. The whole village. Not village, I think it was 5,000 people, the city across the river and a high cliff. They blindfolded them and marched them off the cliff to their death, except they saved a few men to bring wood and build fires to burn the bodies, and then they murdered them. And to no It's just sad. Obama won't touch it. Nobody will touch it. It's a crime against humanity. Look at what the Germans did, these crimes against humanity. Of course, some of the worst were done by the Waffen-SS group, which was Muslim in the Balkans. They murdered so many, and Roma and Jews and Christians. And now we just 2 weeks ago had one of the Kosovo Muslims murdered 2 American airmen went on a military bus and just shot them in Germany. This was a betrayal. If you look back at what's happened to the homeland of Kosovo as it was taken over by Islamists, Muslims, and the reality is the Muslims suffer. In where I go in Russia, they are killing peaceful imams because they're not preaching the Koran. All right. The other point here is the hatred groups, the class struggle hatred. They will support Islam. That's where the socialism comes from. It's actually stronger than Islam, and will probably overturn the Islamic agenda in Europe. It's not clear, but at any rate, I think women's liberation will destroy itself and possibly Islam. But it's destroying itself too fast. But the other group, this superiority reaction formation, it happens in the prisons. Now, on the one hand, you've got the children before the brain growth stages that they have the ability to discriminate, and they're programmed, and will be suicide bombers, and with an innocent face, like they're serving God. The other group that this reaction formation and justification for hatred comes in is prison populations or criminals. That they can rationalize these are not God's people we're taking from, they owe it to us. That's what the Thomas Jefferson and those that were sent to negotiate the release of American ships. You know, America was spending up to 20% of its federal budget to pay Muslims to get ships free before we had a navy. And it was told I can't remember the title from Algiers. Die, I think, is a title. Asked why Muslims do this, and it said because you're sinners and you owe us. And Olga's grandfather was told the same thing in Armenia. He made wagon wheels and he was delivering some to a Muslim. And they had trouble with the Muslims stealing from them all the time. At night they would come and steal horses and cows and stuff. And he asked them, why do the Muslims steal from us? And the man said, well, it's in the book. You owe us. So there's a rationale for being criminal. These are crimes against humanity. Muslims are just people, but when they're programmed, they are able to do these crimes against humanity. It's a crime what they are doing to their children. There needs to be protection of children, that this crime that corrupts their mind before they're of age of reason, it has to stop, whether it's Judaism or Christianity or Hinduism. This memorization has to stop. People have to see they're violating their children's human rights, the depriving them of their individual sovereignty. They will be corrupted forever because they need the protection in those early brain growth stages, especially before 7, but even before 12. They need protection from indoctrination. They need to be supported in learning out of a need to know, and the skills, the numbers, the words, the need to know how to look up things, how to count things. All right, I guess that's enough. I will make one more video where I go beyond Christianity and Muslim to look at ontological issues. And one very hard issue in there that I want to go into depth is how historically what has survived among men and women that gives this genetic background that can be so harmful, because clearly with our knowledge of genetics, within 1,000 years, men were able to domesticate dogs from wolves, wild horses, cattle, and breed these things. Look at all the kinds of dogs now. You can breed the nature you want into them. And we need to look at what doesn't control a person but enables them to reach their highest potential for individual sovereignty, that they can be of value to existence, that their life has meaning for the future. Thank you. And Muslims are as concerned about that as others, and there are many Muslims who aren't. And it's true, the other thing that I've included as is to show the background of women, while motherhood is made like sainthood. In fact, so many women resent their children, so many women kill their children, and it's not aberrant behavior. It's part of their programming from hundreds of thousands of years of being taken by rape, pillage, and plunder, and being impregnated by people that they hated even, and maybe those that murdered those that they loved. And this ability to deceive, to survive, is a natural ability that grows out of the lack of physical strength.
Babies abandoned and left to die in the middle of rubbish in Karachi. Their parents would have faced up to 7 years imprisonment if they had been caught, but that hardly ever happens. Volunteers from the Eddie Foundation recovered the 2 bodies in the middle of the rubbish. It is a sad routine for Mohammed, who's been driving Eddie's ambulances for 25 years.
I've collected too many bodies. I can't even count them. Each time it's difficult, but once it was particularly painful. I went to pick up 2 babies, 2 girls in a rubbish dump. They had been eaten by dogs. Their small bodies were completely mutilated.
In this conservative Muslim country, the birth of children outside of marriage is condemned, and adultery is a crime punishable by death under strict interpretations of Islamic law. Infanticide is a crime on the rise. The association recovered more than 1,000 babies from rubbish dumps last year. Some are illegitimate children, handicapped, or simply born to poverty-stricken families. And statistics are frightening. 9 times out of 10 they are girls.
Poor people abandon their daughters as they think that they'll be a liability in the future. Economic conditions are getting worse, and a family needs at least $1 million rupees to get a girl married off.
That's almost $12,000, and the cost of a wedding can simply be crippling for poor families. Abortion is forbidden in Pakistan.
One of the campers, when asked if he wants to blow himself up as a suicide bomber, answers,
yes.
The smoke continued to stream out of the burnt buildings in Gojra long after Saturday's mob had spent its fury. Gojra is a sleepy little town in Pakistan's largest Punjab province. But it exploded into national limelight on Thursday when a Muslim mob torched dozens of Christian homes during a marriage ceremony.
This issue was based on an allegation which was made by some miscreants that somebody from the Christian community desecrated the Holy Quran.
Subsequently, the incensed and heavily armed Muslim mob opened fire on the neighborhood and then stormed it. Several houses were set ablaze and the Christians fled for their lives. Eventually, riot police were called in to control the situation. Rescue workers are still digging through the debris of the charred buildings for bodies. Most of those recovered so far are of women and children.
8 people in our family have died in this violence, including my sister-in-law and brothers. They shot my father in the head. No one is alive now.
Pakistan's
Minister Bhatti, we forgot one question in the interview. Your life is threatened. By whom? And what sort of threats are you receiving?
The forces of violence, militant band organization, the Taliban and pro-Al-Qaeda, they want to impose their radical philosophy in Pakistan. And whoever stand against their radical philosophy, they threaten them. When I'm leading this campaign against the Sharia laws, for the abolishment of blasphemy law, and speaking for the oppressed and marginalized, persecuted Christian and other minority, these Taliban threaten me. But I want to share that I believe in Jesus Christ, who has given his own life for us. I know what is the meaning of cross, and I'm following of the cross. And I'm ready to die for a cause. I'm living for my community and suffering people, and I will die to defend their rights. So these threats and these warnings cannot change my opinion and principles. I will prefer to die for my principle and for the justice of my community rather to compromise against on these threats.
Thank you.
Pakistani Minister for Minority Shahbaz Bhatti has been shot dead in an attack in Islamabad. The shooting, which took place as Bhatti travelled by car, has been claimed by Pakistani Taliban militants. The only Christian in the Pakistan cabinet...
That's another thing. But what I want to get to, one of the subterfuges, like my academic friends say how bad Christianity is. Look at what they did in the Crusades. Well, first of all, look what the Moslems did in their invasion and their extermination and their forced conversion and their rapes and their forced marriages. Second, the affluence, whether it's Muslim, Christian, or whatever, whenever there's affluence, the wealthy women hire people to take care of their babies, either wet nurses to live in, or many of them hired some people to raise the baby. This is what happened to Europe. What they call the Renaissance was the degradation. It was the poor people that raised their children that were oppressed, that immigrated to America and engaged in a revolution. But the upper class, the ruling class, were the affluent, and their children were deprived of a healthy nursing bond, a simple farm home where there was love and interaction, and the love of the mother and the protection of the father and all of these things that can work together for good, as they did in China, where elders are respected from that culture. Not that the present day culture in China is doing it. No, no, no. The same thing in China today. A young woman in the village can be pregnant, have a baby, have it aborted, go to the city and get a good job as a wet nurse, because there's wealthy women in China now and they don't want to care for their babies, so they're hiring babysitters. That, when I looked into what happened, the Crusades, I was talking about the evil of the Christians in the Crusades, I found examples and elsewhere. There was a lord who even burned fire on the bishop in Constantinople for him to tell where his treasure was, the same way Muhammad did with the Jews in that tribe north that he then murdered the chief, torturing him to find out where the treasure was, and took his widow as wife. But here was this French lord raised by wet nurses and babysitters, a sociopathic, sadomasochistic, called Christian. Has nothing to do with Christianity. The man was a degenerate with power. Wherever he went, his sadomasochism showed up. As long as the prevalence of homosexuality in the ruling class. Look at Christine from Sweden. Her father, Gustavus Adolphus, was killed in the 30 Years' War, and she ended up, she was a cross-dresser and ended up giving up the Sweden. Tinkham, Pennsylvania was New Sweden. The first marriage in America was a Swedish civil ceremony. The first civil marriage, there were Swedish judges there. Well, she withdrew everything, and then she threw up her hands and got some agreement with the Catholic Church, and retired on the Mediterranean for the rest of her life. But Catherine the Great, the stories of her and bestiality. She was a German princess that married the Tsar of Russia. But there's case after case, and it's not a European or Christian, it's wherever wealth happens. It's happening in China today. The breakdown of the home.
South Korea really has a unique place as being the host of a G20, because it's not that long ago that it was considered a developing country. Today it is the world's 13th richest economy. There's been an incredibly rapid rise to riches here, but as I've been finding out, that hasn't been without its consequences. It's the morning rush hour and Seoul is on the move. In this mega city of over 12 million people, everyone has somewhere to get to. The G20 marks a coming of age for South Korea, building on its economic credentials as an Asian giant.
This is Seoul, capital of Korea. Today it is a shell. Her loveliness destroyed by the shifting tides of war.
At the end of the Korean War, Seoul and its people were struggling to survive. Archive footage shows a ruined city, buildings flattened, major thoroughfares reduced to rubble. And this is the very same Seoul street nearly 60 years later. It's been a remarkable transformation. From being an international battlefield, South Korea literally rose from the ashes, transforming itself from one of the world's poorest countries to one of the richest.
In the 60s and 50s, we received development aid from other countries. We want to give back to the international community what we have received.
Are there lessons for the developing world in what you have managed to achieve in South Korea in terms of economic development, particularly in the last 20 years?
If I may highlight one element relevant to other countries, then it is that the best investment is in people.
People like this, students at one of Seoul's most prestigious universities, from an early age they've been expected to achieve. In a system that places a premium on education, for him, it's been worth it. The pressure on South Koreans doesn't end with their education. This is a wealthy society enjoying everything that modern life has to offer. But it is also a society with the highest suicide rate in the developed world. The evidence is that as this country got richer, the suicide rate went up. Here at Seoul's main cathedral, they're trying to help.
This one tells that life is precious.
The Catholic Church runs workshops for young people trying to combat chilling statistics showing that a suicide takes place in South Korea every 34 minutes. Their helpline takes calls from those who feel they have no one to turn to.
When we were in poor country, we all were very happy because we lived all the time with our family members and we can share all the things with them. But after the industrialization, everything was changed. So everyone goes to their office, their own office, and no one look back, no one care for another.
If you want to find healthy, mammalian level healthy, at the family farm, and China had that for hundreds of thousands of years of peaceful family farming, and that's where the respect, that's where Buddhism, Taoism, respect for parents, respect for the grandparents came from. Of course, it went so far as they worshiped the spirits of their past relatives, but the point is, there is evil attacking, because what survived was that which was fiercest or most deceptive on the part of women. The one redeeming quality that men that could work together tended to survive. Men that could trust one another in battle tended to survive. Now, I've made a pretty long introduction to this, and the whole purpose is to clarify the difference between the Koran, Islam, and Muslim. Muslims are people born or converted knowingly or ignorantly into Islam. Many are not programmed to be able to kill. Many do not agree with this mother that I'll show you, who got elected to the Palestinian legislature because she had sons that went and murdered. One of them murdered a bunch of children as a suicide bomber, and another one, and she was so honored in that Islamic culture that she got a place in the legislature. She could get elected. That's the way it is. As the Turkish general said, we don't need to win Europe by battle. We're going to ride the Democratic bus as they increase in population. On the graph, blue is Jewish and green is Palestinians. Notice in the 35-year period, the Palestinian population has gone up 5 times from 1 million to 5 million, and this largely while under the welfare care of the UN, much of which the funding came from the United States.
Hamas leaders call for the annihilation of Israel and of all Jews, for death to and annihilation of America, and for the Islamic conquest of the world.
أيها الأمريكان سيعاقبكم الله أن يعلن الله الحرب عليكم يا آكلي الربا. العلم الأمريكي بفضل الله سبحانه وتعالى سيكون كل التحية إلى المقاومة الأفغانية في أفغانستان التي تمرق أنف جيش أمريكا. أنكم وكأن الذي قتل يهودي واحد كأنه قتل 30 مليون يهودي.
مسلمين لثأرا لا والله لن ينقضي
على يهود هنا في فلسطين. هذا من أروع ألوان البركة الحقيقية لفلسطين.
الله أكبر من أمريكا وأكبر من القوى العظمى، ونقول لهذا الغرب ستهزمون والله. والأمة العربية والإسلامية اليوم صاعدة ناهضة سوف تستعيد زعامة العالم.
All clips shown on this video were aired before the current Gaza crisis. For the most up-to-date information on the Middle East, visit www.memory.org.
Those are Hamas kids. Look at them. This is Hamas kids. Do you think they are really kids? Kids, it means people who they are innocent. Those are full of hate. They are ready to kill any Jew they see in the street. Then they will say to you, they are killing our kids. What do you expect from those kids to do? I don't blame them, by the way. They are kids. But this can tell you how much hate those people they have in their heart. Watch. This is the wooden party. Look, Hamas is coming now with those trucks. You see the trucks? Look. Look how many trucks. Just because they are singing songs. They are coming with their guns. And soon you will see what you will not believe. Look the guns machines in their hands. All of those are Hamas. Look, they are sounding them. Look at this. For playing songs in a wedding, they are killing their people. What if you do something else? Look in there. They are beating the guy who is is getting married. They are beating the head of him. Look. They killed him.
That's manipulation. We need to help Muslims not be deprived of their individual sovereignty. We need to recognize the difference between Islam, the Koran, and a Muslim.
I'm going to talk to you about memorization as a cultural trait and the good part and the bad part of it. The background of memorization is through the Jewish culture, where they were required to memorize the books of Moses. In the Fertile Crescent, before the time of Abraham, already there was affluence. There were cities. There were power people, a class of rulers. And they had enough wealth to afford servants. And wherever this happens, the wealthy get wet nurses and babysitters for their children. And their children who inherit the power are deprived of those mammalian nursing bonds and paternal relationships that give protection and provision. And they often end up sociopathic or psychopathic and ultimately lead to much evil in the culture. But that's in the background. Abraham rebelled against the practice of child sacrifice. This, just like today, they're murdering in the order of 60 million babies a year, unwanted pregnancies. But in those days, they would throw them in a fire to some god, or throw them off a cliff, or throw them in a river, or leave them for the animals to get in the woods. But Abraham set a precedent of not sacrificing children, and that was the foundation for being sanctified. Sanctified means separated from the rest of humankind, a special culture respecting life. And that went on after the freedom from Egypt The theme was reinforced by Moses with the Ten Commandments, and the memorization was installed to protect that culture, to memorize, that the young men would not have the freedom to think on their own. When you're forced to memorize, you can either comply or rebel. And in the Jewish culture, rebellion meant rejection by the family. Now, much of Christianity and Judaism were picked up by Muhammad, and he took the license to rape, pillage, and plunder as a service to Allah. And still today, sending children off as suicide bombers is in the Koran is justified. It's holy war, and they have a blessing for their sacrifice in eternity. At any rate, this memorization is common to many cults. It deprives the memorizer of the individual freedom to grow in individual sovereignty. They can comply and rebel, the same as the supposed Enlightenment in Europe was. Much of it was led, like the communist ideology, by rebellious Jews who were rebelling against their constraints of memorization. But they really weren't free. And you see how corrupted communism was in its implementation, how much they murdered their own people. So memorization was lost. They rebelled against that culture. But we can, through mammalian caring for our children, we can raise children that are able to care for others like self and be thankful to their source of creation, their source of existence. They don't need to memorize. They can learn at a later age what other people have said and thought, but they can be free to think and see for themselves. Like Paul says, in Him we live and move and have our being. That's God. There's nothing outside of God. God is reality. Nuclear reality, chemical reality, biological reality, sociological reality, psychological reality. It's physical reality. In Him we live and move and have our being. And the memorization will only deny the one forced to memorize the freedom to grow as an individual. They can rebel or comply. In Islam, they can't rebel. It's the death penalty by Sharia law. So this is the background of memorization and the harm it has done and the harm it's doing today. What we really need to do is respect the rights of every conceived child, that it be conceived in health and cared for by mammalian nursing bonds and paternal relationships that give protection and provision. Mother that is capable of giving that mammalian nursing bond. More on that later. Thank you.
And we need to understand what it does harm, what harms the truth, what harms the potential of an individual, what harms the potential of a society, what harms the culture of child rearing. It's not all Muslim. There are some things good as far as respecting the home and responsibility to children and making a responsible home, but it doesn't have to be based on violence and threat. It can be like the family farm culture where they're all working together and feeling loved. Look at the suicide rate in South Korea. I had that as part of my preparation for testimony in Washington last month before my car was totaled on the way going through Richmond, Virginia, but that's another story. I will stop here and break up this at places to give some observations of what I'm talking about, and then I'll come back for a wrap-up. I don't know whether at this point whether part 3 will be the end. I think it won't be. I think I'll deal just here in part 3 with Muslims, because I do not hate Muslims. I've had Muslim friends, as I've said, and they're all part of this intelligent creation, things formed in God. God is operationally defined. God is space, matter, and motion, eternal and infinite. Matter is not created or destroyed. Space is not created or destroyed. The potential and actual motion is not destroyed. These are eternal. We are created out of this, like creating a hat. We're not making poof magic, something out of nothing. This magic creationism of the Bible or the Koran or the creation theory of the Big Bang. I'm a physicist. My website would help you with physics if you were interested. I rescued a math and physics website from Indonesia, I think it was, from a German professor that died before he got his work completed. You can find that on my website too. But I'll stop here and get down to the business of putting in the parts that show the observations rather than me just talking.
I want to talk to you about security measures, but do you think that has there been any evidence of the Al-Qaeda ties that this suspect has been claiming?
Right now, that is part of the criminal justice investigation that is ongoing, and I think it would be inappropriate to speculate as to whether or not he had such ties. What we're focused on is making sure that the air environment remains safe, that people are confident when they travel. And one thing I'd like to point out is that the system worked. Everybody played an important role here. The passengers and crew of the flight took appropriate action. Within literally an hour to 90 minutes of the incident occurring, all 128 flights in the air have been notified to take some special measures in light of what had occurred on the Northwest Airlines flight. We instituted new measures on the ground and at screening areas, both here in the United States and in Europe, where this flight originated. So the whole process of making sure that we respond properly, correctly, and effectively went very smoothly. One thing I'd like to point out is that the system worked.
Well, it seems as though the reason this plane did not explode is that the explosion failed, and then you had some quick passengers who jumped on him when he lit this fire. So let me ask you about how he could have gotten on the plane.
One thing I'd like to point out is that the system worked.
With this substance, the PETN, I mean, we get on, you can't have more than 3.4 ounces of toothpaste, and you can't have more than 3.4 ounces of anything in a little bag. And so I think people are thinking, so how does he get on with an explosive? How did...
One thing I'd like to point out is that the system worked.
That get past security.
Well, we're asking the same questions, looking at what happened in Amsterdam as he transferred flights to a flight that was U.S. bound. We've already been working with the airport and airline authorities there to see what kind of screening equipment was used. One thing I'd like to point out is that the system worked. We have no suggestion that he was improperly screened, but we want to go through and see. We're always evolving.
I'm sorry, if he was not improperly screened or properly screened, and yet you want Americans to feel safe on the planes, and so...
One thing I'd like to point out is that the system worked.
if he was properly screened and he got on anyway with that, it doesn't feel that safe.
Well, you know, it should. This was one individual, literally thousands that fly on thousands of flights every year, and he was stopped before any damage could be done, and now the forensics are analyzing, well, what actually could have been done with whatever substance he had and whatever amount. Those are all undetermined issues right now. And then we will go back and see about that technology, about that screening, just as we will go back at the president's request and look at how we put people on different types of watch lists. Those are things that had been in place for many years. They have been the procedures that we have utilized. And again, once this incident occurred, what I really think deserves attention is everybody responded quickly, effectively, without you know, panicking and shutting down the airline systems or air travel. What we did is dealt with the incident, put out additional security measures both at airports here and abroad, and made sure that the flights that were in the air were indeed safe.
Let me ask you, because you're right, you know, this was one individual, but that's really all it takes.
One thing I'd like to point out is that the system works.
If a plane explodes, it just takes one individual. So let me ask you about those watch lists. Here's someone whose father came to the U.S. Embassy and said, I am worried about his ties. I'm worried that he's becoming increasingly militant. He's on a list, but somehow no one looks at him more closely, apparently, than any other passenger.
One thing I'd like to point out is that the system works.
Is there some way, I mean, it seems to me there's all these computer lists, and this one has suspected ties, and that one, and this is the no-fly list. Is there not some way to merge this information so that he would have popped up someplace?
One thing I'd like to point out is that the system worked. Well, there's no suggestion that he was on what's called a tied list, which has a 500,000 plus names on it, and there's no suggestion that that was not shared information. The issue was there enough information to move him to the more specific list, which would require additional examination or indeed being on no-fly status. And to date, it does not appear that there was any such information to move him from that tied list, which was shared and everybody had it, but to a more specific list, which would require different types of screening at the airport.
So not even a father coming in knowing what his son has been up to and reporting this to the U.S. Embassy isn't enough? I mean, what puts you on the watch list?
One thing I'd like to point out is that the system works.
If that isn't enough.
Indeed, you can. Let's not get into that because for one thing, we need to ascertain exactly who said what to whom and when. But also, you have to understand that you need information that is specific and credible if you're going to actually bar someone from air travel. He was on a general list of over 500,000 people. Everybody had access to it. But there was not the kind of credible information in the sense of derogatory information that would move him up that list. Now, one thing I'd like to point out is that the system worked. One of the things I think we will be doing over the next weeks is really looking at those watch list procedures in light of this occurring and saying, okay, do those need to be changed? They've been in place for a number of years. Do they need to be adjusted in light of this event? Just as we will look at our screening and screening technology once we know for sure what he had and what he had access to see whether any of that needs to be changed.
I really enjoy looking forward to the conclusions and discussion of this series for that reason, but I'll stop here as far as interjecting the clarification that yes, Islam has done much evil and justifies suicide and murder in its conquest. And yes, it is based on a rationale that originated with the Jewish, that they were serving God and not doing human sacrifice and needed to have a safe place to live when they came out of Egypt, which was based on the movement of Abraham and his people to move away from child sacrificing and find Zion, that place where it would be safe for this culture that respected its children. Now, we'll get on with it now.
Political correctness can lead to some kind of paralysis where you don't address reality. I mean, look, Bill, I'm not a bigot. You know the kind of books I've written about the civil rights movement in this country. But when I get on a plane, I got to tell you, if I see people who are in Muslim garb, and I think, you know, they're identifying themselves first and foremost as Muslims, I get worried. I get nervous. Now, I remember also that when that Times Square bomber was at court, I think this is just last week, he said the war with Muslims, America's war with is just beginning, first drop of blood. I don't think there's any way to get away from these facts.
Juan feels the way he feels. That is not for me to pass judgment on. That is really his feelings that he expressed on Fox News are really between him and his, you know, psychiatrist or his publicist or take your pick.
Are you kidding me?
I mean, so now I'm a
psychiatrist.
Now I am mentally unstable.
And this is
I'm
a
a
woman
journalist
who's running this operation.
Oh my God! I mean, come
It
on.
is. It is. It's unbelievable.
So that's
Thank you.
One thing I'd like to point out is that the system works.